Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum audience. Welcome to KK in Conversation. In today's podcast, we are discussing disaster risk management in Pakistan. Unfortunately, Pakistan is exposed to disasters, and lack of the fact the understanding risk is vital. And due to this lack of understanding, millions of population have been perished in past 3 decades. To discuss the problem and make sense of the growth path that Pakistan should be installing into our system, I have with me Lieutenant General retired Omar Mahmood Hayat, Hilal Imtiaz Military. He is former chairman of National Disaster Management Authority, former chairman Earthquake Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Authority, former chairman Pakistan Ordnance Factory WA, and former Director General Procurement Army and former Chief of Staff Sport Group of IDPs that he was in 2009. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam ji. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining me, sir. So straight coming to my first question. Pakistan is facing a nexus of crisis without any doubt. That is food crisis, energy crisis, and water scarcity. And climate change is making disaster risk management more difficult by raising the uncertainty. What are your remarks on it, sir?
Ji, Khawaja sir, again, thank you for having me and thank you for raising this issue. It's a very important and a very critical issue for a country like us. Pakistan is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. If you look at our history, Pakistan has passed through all types of natural disasters. And not only natural disasters, we've passed through most types of man-made disasters also. And what has compounded this impact on Pakistan, as you pointed out, is climate change. Let me give you some facts and figures. The most common disaster in Pakistan are hydrometeorological disasters. And from 1947 to 2010, Pakistan faced numerous floods, and these floods were varying in degrees. The loss to the Pakistan economy in those years from 1947 to 2010 was around 9.5 billion US dollars. From 2010 to 2020, just in hydrometeorological disasters, we've lost something like over 10 billion US dollars. And this impact has sort of, it has been created because of the impact of climate change. And according to a World Bank study, the top 10 countries which are impacted by climate change, as per a German report a couple of years back, Pakistan was number 7 in terms of receiving the impacts of climate change. And this climate change, what it has done is that it has impacted the frequency of rainfall. It has impacted the area where the rainfall used to happen. It has resulted into urban flooding instead of riverine flooding. The impact that we've seen in the last 3-4 years, what we see in Karachi, what we see in Lahore, and other urban areas, while the chances of riverine flooding still persist, but the chances of urban flooding and localized flooding have increased tremendously. Climate change has resulted in disaster the melting of glaciers. It has resulted in something called GLOF, glacial lake outburst floods, and we've recently, yesterday or day before, we are witnessing one such event in Chitral. So it has had a tremendous impact on Pakistan. You talk of earthquakes, you talk of drought, you talk of, other types of natural disasters, and Pakistan has faced all kinds of disasters in the last 10 to 15 years.
Sir, thank you, sir. This assessment brings me to the very important issue about the authority that you were chairman a year ago. That is National Disaster Management Authority. For our audience, is an autonomous and constitutionally established federal authority mandated to deal with the whole spectrum of disasters and their management in the country. But it seems the organization has failed to satisfy its mandate due to intra-provincial coordination gaps. And this brings to the question that why we can't use the Council of Common Interest, because presently to hold meetings, formulating policies and coordination seems a difficult task, as the list of stakeholders is quite large, sir. And the decisions that are made by CCI are considered as result oriented. Moreover, the energy and water crisis are already at agenda of CCI. So why we can't make disaster risk management part of the agenda, sir?
Everything that happens in the country flows out of a particular constitutional framework. Okay. Now, National Disaster Management Authority was established in 2007. The National Disaster Management Authority Act was enacted in 2010. Okay. The Act lays down a particular path according to which the National Disaster Management Authority was to develop, and the provincial disaster management authorities were to develop, and the district disaster management authorities were to develop. Where do we stand today? National Disaster Management Authority was raised and has done a very good job in coordination, in policy planning. In the last 10 years, the type of policy planning and coordination that NDMA has done is phenomenal. It is recognized internationally by the UN, by a number of other organizations, that it has definitely brought improvement in the disaster management structure of the country, or the awareness that people have. Unfortunately, when we do not face a disaster, the policymakers tend to forget that we are a disaster-prone country. Because we have so many other issues, the resources are diverted towards those issues instead of disaster risk reduction. Now, you talked about Council of Common Interest. That's a very interesting idea. But I don't think there is a need for including disaster management subjects in the Council of Common Interest, because as per the National Disaster Management Act, the supreme body overseeing disaster management in the country is the National Disaster Management Commission. It has all the chief ministers, the prime minister sees fit. Now, this forum exists, and decisions taken by this forum are unanimous and include the chief ministers or the chief executives of all provinces. Unfortunately, the meetings of this organization or this commission are very rare. When I took over in 2017, we had not had a meeting of National Disaster Management Commission for the last 5 years. It was only in 2018 that we managed to have a meeting of the National Disaster Management Commission. Now, that is a constitutionally mandated body to strategize and oversee disaster management in the country. And it involves all provincial reps. So with this structure already available, I do not see what is the need of creating other structures. We must use this structure, and we must empower this structure to undertake policy planning and provide guidance to disaster management structures in the country. Now, what will also amaze you is that disaster management, although such an important subject, does not receive the patronage that it should receive. You see, the Disaster Management Act envisages the raising of a national disaster response force. My predecessors and I tried our level best to get approval from the government to raise a national disaster response force, with particular capabilities of disaster management which are not available in the country. Unfortunately, we were not successful. Can you imagine that we are constitutionally mandated to run an institute called the National Institute of Disaster Management so that we can create awareness, provide training to the federal and provincial governments, to the district governments on how to handle disasters, to run programs for the civil society to create resilient communities. Unfortunately, I don't know the situation right now, but for the 2 years that I was there, National Institute of Disaster Management, I had to go to international donors, and it is through international donor support that we were able to run the National Institute of Disaster Management. So the focus and ownership of disaster management is what is lacking, and that is what needs to improve.
Sir, thank you, sir. Indeed, we lack will in implementing our plans. We just develop documents and develop working papers, but unfortunately unable to deliver them on the ground. And and coming to my next question with this, that Pakistan being a poor country is where the climate change is ravaging and the only adding into uncertainty. What toolkit for the risk governance Pakistan should adopt, from disaster preparedness, prevention, and response to rehabilitation?
Right. You see, the world over, the concept of disaster management has changed from a response-centric approach. People have started moving to a risk reduction approach. Okay? Now, this feeds directly into your question. They say internationally that every dollar you spend on risk reduction, you save $5 when an actual disaster strikes. So the benefits are multiplied 5 times over. Okay? Now, there are numerous programs, and Protection Plan 4 was prepared in consultation with NDMA, and a number of disaster risk reduction measures were included in the National Flood Protection Plan 4. It has an outlay of a couple of $2 billion. I do not know the funding status of that program right now, but for the time that I was there was no funding on this program. Okay? There is a national disaster risk reduction policy, and there are implementation guidelines which have been issued again, which would cost Pakistan something like over $2 billion. And unfortunately, up till now, as per my understanding, there's been no funding by the government on that program. You see, our assessment of disasters goes down to district level. Okay. Now, our basic policies are formulated on a macro assessment of disasters in Pakistan. Until and unless we have micro level hazard assessments of each district, and this is something that we started in NDMA, and we've done about 15 districts. It is called MHVRA, Multi-Hazard Vulnerability and Risk Assessment. So you do a multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessment of a particular district. You come to know the exact nature of disasters, the exact nature of threat. You then devise exact risk reduction measures for that district. And if, God forbid, a disaster strikes that district, then you have complete data available, you have complete resources available to tackle that disaster. So until and unless we do a complete MHVRA on that micro level study and then collate this into provincial plans and eventually into a national plan. Now, unfortunately, all our planning would be based on very broad guidelines. And I was saying that unless we have micro level studies of risk and hazard assessments in Pakistan, it is our entire planning will be based on assumptions, and any planning that is based on assumptions is something which will never work out or stand during a disaster. Can you imagine that up till now we did not have a hazard assessment of the industrial disasters in Pakistan? That's something that we started work on. We do not have accurate assessments of the type of building codes in Pakistan. And NDMA, my predecessor, worked with the Engineering Council of Pakistan, and we came up with essential building codes so that, the disasters that happen because of these things are also mitigated. That there are in our society, and then come up with risk reduction plans, and then come up with response plans.
Sir, thank you, sir. Sir, just a question in this preview. कि हमारे पास we have rescue services in Sindh and Punjab, that is rescue 1122 in Punjab and Chipa in Sindh. So can we use these services as our rapid disaster response forces?
Gee, you see, there's a concept that we prepared at NDMA. All emergency services actually the world over fall under the domain of disaster management. Okay, we prepared a concept paper in NDMA. There is some years at least we've not seen civil defense active anywhere in Pakistan. Okay, but you'll be surprised that civil defense has a presence at district level. Like, I'll give you the example of one particular year when I was carrying out this research. The annual budget of NDMA was 250 million, and the annual budget of civil defense in Punjab was 850 million. Now, civil defense, the world over, has transformed into something called civil protection. And in civil protection, the main responsibility is of disaster management. So the concept that we prepared was to ask the government to allow us to retrain civil defense, integrate civil defense at the district level with the district disaster management authority, and this civil defense or civil protection would become their executing arm. At provincial level, they'll be tied up with the provincial disaster management authority, and at the federal level with the NDMA. The concept was that there are resources existing, there are finances existing. We just need to retrain, rehash, and create a disaster response. Unfortunately, up till now, I have not heard that there has been any progress on this account.
Sir, unfortunately, if I may share, I was reading few reports that are predicting that we may face the floods like we faced in 2010. So it is very unfortunate of us that we are not prepared. We don't seem prepared to tackle these kind of disasters. So thank you for the answer. But lastly, and concluding this our discussion, I would like to ask you one more question, the last, and I'll ask you to conclude it, that how can we invest in public sector and civil society to make the first line of defense against the uncertainty? And by uncertainty, I mean the uncertainty that is caused by the climate change.
Community resilience building is part of the mandate of NDMA. NDMA, along with a number of international local NGOs, does programs where we go and teach risk reduction activities. Okay? One such program that NDMA, I'm sure, is still running is the school safety framework. Okay. Now, the concept of this was to go to each school, carry out a hazard assessment of that school, and then teach the faculty and the children on how to respond with when a disaster strikes. Okay. This is what creates resilience within. You know that 2005 earthquake, how many children we lost during the 2005 earthquake? Because there has never been any training, any awareness of our people. So this was an effort by NDMA to create that awareness. And NDMA does a good job in collaborating with international NGOs, with local NGOs, and creating awareness within communities. Now, this takes me back to what I said. If we have multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessments of each district, then we can target those districts according to the assessments that have been carried out, and carry out awareness and carry out risk reduction measures according to the needs of that particular district. So this is imperative.
Sir, thank you for your time, and thank you for your having with me this very fruitful discussion. If I summarize this in 2 points, that would you agree with me that we are suffering because of absence of political will? Secondly, absence of funding, and third is the lack of the science and data management. If I summarize our discussion in these 3 points.
Again, you're absolutely right. You've seen political will. Okay, you've seen political will. You've seen an organization called NCOC come up, which has managed this virus very well. Okay, so if there is political will, resources become available, and when resources become available, the implementation is very sound, because we have people who understand this, people who have a knowledge of this, and we have, and we as a nation are very resilient when it comes to disasters. So yes, if there is political will, if there are resources, and secondly, if our entire concept is digitized and based on artificial intelligence, and this is something that, again, I would like to point out, we had a concept at NDMA to create something called the National Emergency Operations Center, which you now see as NCOC. I and my colleagues went to the World Bank, and they were very kind to give us a funding of about $90 million to create a National Emergency Operations Center. And this center was to become the hub of all activities related to disaster management, and was based on technology. And you will be amazed to know that, you know, we have a standalone system with the Pakistan Met Department, which forecasts weather, which monitors flooding, which monitors earthquakes. We have a standalone system with Sparko, which also does this, which does the rivers. We have a standalone system with Babda. Unfortunately, all of these systems are not integrated to create one common operating picture of disaster management in the country. And that was the concept, to integrate all of these systems and apply artificial intelligence matrices on these, and create a national disaster management, a data management system. And that is the need of the hour, and we need to go in that direction.
Sir, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time, sir.
It's a pleasure, sir. Thank you. Thank you for having me.